It's time for the Brouhaha Sports Show. Brouhaha Sports with award-winning sports writer Dale McKee and co-host Marshall Wood. Talking sports with the legends of the game and famous sports personalities. Brouhaha! Now to Marshall and Dale with tonight's guest.
Good evening, everyone. Brouhaha time. Marshall Wood, Dale McKee, ready to hook it up, tee it off, kick it off, tip it off. What you like that, didn't you? I don't get a chuckle out of you very often.
Well, tip it off, you know.
You like that?
I thought basketball was over. But,
Yeah,
I didn't know if you were in the right season.
I'm never in the right season, but I'm always in season.
There you go.
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I tell you what, probably the only way I could be better if I was an LSU baseball fan, which I'm not, but they won, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, you have to give the champions their due.
Yeah.
And what's odd, you know, last year Southern Miss put them out of the regionals, you know, down in Hattiesburg. No, the super regionals, Southern lost to Ole Miss, but LSU came there. They were one of the 4 teams in the region.
Oh, way to go, Dale.
Yeah.
That's why you are the sports man, son.
And I remember the LSU coach saying after the game, he said, well, we're going to have to get to a different level in our pitching.
Well, they did, didn't they?
They did.
How do you do that so fast?
Well, it's called the transfer portal. It's called NIL. You know, I think their football program was put on 3 years probation this year, which is like saying, please don't do it again. And
I saw that.
And so, you know, I don't know what, you know, maybe they're doing the same thing. No, but they seem to have a good coach, a very good coach.
That seems to matter a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think, you know, they've kind of changed the culture a little bit. Now, they didn't have a bad coach before Johnson came in to be the head baseball coach, but it just seemed like football, they went from Jekyll to Hyde, or whatever what you want to call it, from Coach Orgeron until Brian Kelly. I mean, they're 2 different guys.
Yeah.
You know? Kelly's more or less, he's almost like a professional CEO.
Yeah.
And Coach O was like the old
cheerleader.
1960s coach.
Yeah.
Hit him in the mouth. I don't see blood.
That's right. That's the way we played back when men were men, right? They weren't like 6'8", 340 running 4.8 40s.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But anyway. So, you know, LSU wins it. That's, you know, you're talking about Southern LSU, you know, they had hosted 2 super regionals, you know, back to back, which is impressive. We got a guy going to be talking to it with us tonight, focusing on USM.
Really?
I think so.
Okay.
This is your show. I'm just trying to help.
Well, you know, we get so many calls, folks, about people wanting to be on the show.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not Jay Moore; it's other people too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, who we got tonight?
We have Mr. Andrew Abadie of the Pine Belt Sports in Hattiesburg.
Okay.
And he's going to tell us all about USM football and baseball.
Well, I'll tell you what, I am a USM guy, and I'm excited about this. So I'll tell you what, let's take a break, and without further ado, we'll hear from our sponsors and come back with tonight's guest. What do you say?
Sounds great.
Dale and I'll be back right after this message with tonight's guest.
Phillips Building Supply in Laurel, your hometown building supply store since 1954. We are locally owned and pride ourselves on helping our customers find exactly what they need. From foundations to roofs to doors and windows, Phillips has it. For tools, hardware, lumber, and plywood, visit Phillips Building Supply.
Welcome to the show, Andrew. Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me on, Dale.
Hey, always enjoy you. Keep up with your writing down there in the Pine Belt Sports and do a great job down there. So today we're just going to talk to you about Southern Mississippi athletics, and of course the big news here in the last couple weeks has been Coach Scott Berry stepping down. What are your thoughts and comments after his great 14-year-old career there as a head coach and what he accomplished?
Yeah, I mean, Scott Berry, I mean, what can't you say? I mean, he's the epitome of a class act in college baseball. He's been a great guy to work with. You know, I've enjoyed my time with Scott Berry. That's probably an understatement, and I'm sure the fans would say the same. But you know, it was I think expected for him to retire after this year. I know they like to keep things internal, and Coach Oz has definitely shown why he's the next guy. But you know, looking at Coach Berry's career, it's remarkable. I mean, he's one of the most impactful coaches on the baseball program, and I would argue one of the most impactful Southern Miss coaches in Southern Miss athletics history, with the way he's carried himself and, you know, the amount of winning and growing he's done to Southern Miss's program. I mean, you know, it's a well-deserved retirement, I'll say that.
Well, what impressed me about him is the players that he got to Hattiesburg that nobody knew much about. I mean, he's gotten players from Minnesota and Louisiana, especially the South Louisiana part. You know, he went over there to Georgia a couple years ago and got some key players out of there. He's always had a great basis recruiting area because he had like 20 members of the team this year just from Mississippi. So what do you think attracts these players? Was it Coach Berry or just the USM baseball program?
I think it boils down to the program, and you know, Scott was he let his assistant coaches do their thing, and he's hands off with some things. Most things, I think he was hands off with more things than you would think a head coach would be involved with. That makes sense. I know he let his assistants do their thing, and you know, that's kind of what's made Southern Miss thrive. You know, it's why they've had what will now be 5 coaches since 1959. I mean, it's just you know, I think when kids come and see Southern Miss, they see how crazy this state as well as Hattiesburg is about college baseball, but then they kind of see how they're just kind of this machine. They churn out winning seasons. They're always in the mix of a conference championship. They're top 25. I think we could say a regular top 25 team, and you know, the talent speaks for it. You know, they've got guys going to the Major League Baseball draft every year. I mean, it's just, you know, it's the epitome of what you want to play for. If you're one of the best players, I mean, they go after kids in the region, but if you're somebody in the country that wants to play for a good college baseball team, Southern Miss has a lot of check marks.
Do you think the state as a whole is going to be hurt? I'm talking about Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and especially Southern Miss. Do you think they're going to be really hurt by this NIL I guess, system that they have in place now where players can go? Like, you know, they lost the Waltrip boy from Georgia to Florida last year, and of course he's had a good game up there in the College World Series. Do you think that's going to affect them down the road?
I mean, I'm sure it will. I mean, you saw, I think one of Mississippi State's top players goes in the portal for one day and then withdraws his name. I mean, that's NIL at its finest. You know, I think it's gonna impact NIL. NIL is going to impact all of college sports. You know, I think one of the interesting points. I can't remember who I was talking to at Southern Miss, but it's like, okay, you have to, you know, recruit and build your team every year, but you have to basically re-recruit your team every year as well. And I mean, it's a whole different system, you know. You got to account for losing 2 to 3 players from your roster every year now, whereas just, 3 years ago, losing 3 players from your roster might have been a lot. It's just, you know, it's this brave new world with NIL and the transfer portal. I think it's still, you know, it's going to get crazy, but I still think it's going to get tweaked. I think Congress is going to step in and change things a little bit, but it's a different world. It's definitely a different world, and, you know, I'm sure the rich will get richer. That's usually how it goes.
Reflecting back on the Golden Eagles season for a moment, it seemed like that after they went to Coastal Carolina, and of course they didn't do well the first 2 nights up there, but the third day that they came back and won. But after that, they seemed to be on a great roll. I mean, it almost looked like the schedule got easier for them based on wins and losses, you know, some of the teams they played. Do you think it benefited them early in the season playing some of the top contenders in the Sun Belt?
Well, I think, you know, we look at how things shook out for them, and it definitely played well with, you know, it was a part of the conversation of them with hosting that super regional. You know, they had a tough strength of schedule. I like to tell people Coastal Carolina kind of poked the sleeping giant, but They did have an easier stretch, but I think it really helped them find a groove. I mean, Louisiana was a very good opponent. They were playing very good baseball down the stretch, and I thought they handled them for the most part pretty well. But I just think, they hadn't hit their peak yet either. I think when you go back to 2022, they peaked too soon, and I think they peaked at right about when you need to peak, which is in that last fourth of the season, and they certainly did that, and it almost worked out for them in making a trip to the College World Series.
Yeah, it seems like every year that they have, or the last 2 or 3 years, they have a hot streak, at least a dozen wins in a row. And then they, at least that's what's been repeated the last couple years, but it's been in different parts of the season. Like you said, last year was early. This season it was kind of late when they went on a great route. What was the one thing that you think turned them around again, after the Coastal Carolina series? Was it inserting somebody into the batting order, or the pitching just got a little bit better all year?
Yeah, I think it was two of those things. I think Nick Monaster sliding into that, just kind of locking down that second base spot was a big deal for them. He gave them some power and consistency that they were needing in the bottom of the order. I think, and they had lost 11 arms from last year's pitching staff. Like, we all knew they had the pieces. It was just a lot of figuring out where they needed to go. And I think when they go on that big streak, that's where we finally saw it unfold, and they figured it out. And I think another part of it was that the hitting was really bad too, and they turned that around midway through the season. And they just, that's the thing. Like, with at least with the way it's been under Scott Berry, they might hit their bumps in the road, but they find a way to correct them and find that winning formula.
Well, I've seen Dustin Dickerson play since I guess he was 11 and 12 years old, but where did he get that power that last month of the season, where he hit 10 home runs or 11 home runs? He just seemed to be a terror at the plate, especially in I guess the playoffs. The regionals and the super regionals and all that. He just his bat would just exploded. Was there any secret to that? Did Dustin ever tell us his secret?
No. His secret was that he was doing everything the same. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Maybe the baseball gods just finally looked down upon him and said, "You can hit for power now." But your guess is as good as mine. I hope he can keep it up as he kind of starts looking towards the MLB draft this upcoming July.
So so how many underclassmen may they lose to the draft?
A lot. I think right now they'll have, in terms of on their defense, they'll have, I think, just 3 guys back. You'll have Carson Pato, Monaster. I think it's easier to say, who they're going to keep rather than who they're losing. I mean, they're going to lose their left fielder, their center fielder, first baseman, shortstop, third base, both their catchers. Obviously, they're losing Tanner Hall. I mean, they have a lot of spots to replace.
Man,
and it's like that for pitching too.
I got you. Well, what's Coach Oz bring to the table? We know his great success at Jones Junior College, and he was a heck of a high school coach. So, what's Coach Oz going to do? Maybe a little bit different from Coach Berry. Anything?
Yeah, no, I think he will. I think he'll be a little bit more hands-on than maybe Coach Berry was, but that might be just the fact that Coach Berry had been in it so long. But I think one of the more interesting things that Oz will have that Berry didn't was, they'll have that 4th assistant coach spot available. And, with Oz going from being the pitching coach to, the head coach, he's still going to coach the pitchers. So they'll have like 2 extra assistant coach spots, or they'll throw more money at their assistant coaches to stay. I mean, that's pretty vital. It's one thing to have consistency up top, but to have consistency with your assistants is, I feel like, even bigger. I saw reports of them adding Ladd Rhodes, who was a volunteer assistant at Southern Miss that 2020 season, but that's a guy who had coached for Oz at Jones, played for Oz at Jones, and he was instrumental in Nicholls State's big run that they had this year. He's a hitting coach, big time recruiter, and I think he's going to be, if that report is true, that'll be a valuable addition for Oz. But I think I don't know how much you change with considering how much they've been winning. What's the old saying? If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, let's switch sports for a minute. Tell us what you think about the Golden Eagles football schedule. You know, the strength of the schedule, who might challenge them non-conference, and who might challenge them within the conference, and who do you think Will Hall will have playing quarterback? A committee again, or maybe just one guy?
Well, to answer the schedule question, I would describe it as brutal. You know, I don't know if there's not many very easy games on there this year. I mean, the non-conference is rough. I mean, outside of Alcorn State, you got to go to Florida State, play Mississippi State, and host Tulane. I mean, that's three really rough teams. And then the Sun Belt, as we learned last year, was competitive from almost top to bottom. And you know, there's no shortage of competitive games for Southern Miss this year. I mean, I don't really know. Like, I think they go 5-7, 6-6, but you never know with how Will Hall has. If Will Hall gets things going this year. For the quarterback, I think it's going to be one guy under center this year. They have got two. I think the two options that they have at quarterback will be better than what they had last year. That's between Holman Edwards, who's from French Camp, played at East Central Community College, and then Billy Wiles, who's a transfer from Clemson. You know, both those guys looked really good in the spring. Billy Wiles had some oblique problems in the second half of spring, and you could kind of tell it was messing with his throw. But I like them both. I think there's no wrong answer either way. I got to kind of give the edge to Holman Edwards, but, you know, we got a whole fall camp to see, and, you know, the roster will be more complete. So I'm curious to see how that shakes out, like everybody else, of course.
All right. What about the defense? The defense got a lot of starters returning, don't they?
Well, they lost a lot in the secondary. You know, and that was kind of their bread and butter the past few years. And, of course, they lose their defensive coordinator, Austin Armstrong, who I'm sure will be a head coaching, that hot name that'll float around the coaching carousel and very quickly based off of how successful he was at USM. He's now at Florida. But yeah, no, they got to replace a lot in that secondary. They have added a lot from that transfer portal, you know, and it worked very well for them with the defensive line. They have a lot of defensive line pieces coming back. They have linebackers coming back, but it's all been guys who've had injuries. Nobody's ever really played a full season. Swayze Bozeman, Josh Carr, you know, they've got a lot of reps, but haven't made it through a whole season. Hayes Maples is another. He tore his ACL a second time last year. But, you know, he's been a very good player. So, I mean, if they stay healthy there, I think they could be very good at linebacker. But the question is, can they stay healthy? They've got Avery Hobbits, who's another guy who's really held things down for them. But, yeah, that's secondary. It's going to be basically new faces outside of Jay Jones or Jay Stanley. So I'm kind of curious to see how that works out, especially under Dan O'Brien, who actually had previously coached the secondary and is now the new DC. So that should be an interesting storyline moving forward.
This is Marshall. I've been graduated. I graduated from USM, been a Southern fan for a long time. And, you know, I look back historically, and, you know, and we hung our hat on, we'd win the games, you know, we were supposed to win. And every once in a while, we would beat an Alabama or an Auburn. Sometimes we'd beat them in the same year and things like that. And we kind of lost that for whatever reasons, coaching changes and this and another. Last year, with the big win over Tulane, you know, I'm sitting here as a fan, and I'm thinking, you know, I see what Will's doing over there. The kids are buying in. We're getting better. I kind of feel that we may have a chance to cycle back around again with what I see going on over there and the coaching and the players they've got, and that we may be coming back into a position to beat some of these high-powered teams every once in a while and win the one we're supposed to win. I kind of see a turn or a shift that we were hoping to see under Will Hall. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is, you know, it starts at administration. You look back, kind of just, you know, not to throw Jay Hopson under the bus because he had some decent seasons, but you know, Jay Hopson was one of the lowest paid coaches in the country. Southern Miss was one of the lowest paid coaching staffs in the country. You know, Jeremy McLean has, I think they're in the top 3 or 4 of coaching staffs paid now. And the Sun Belt, that's huge. Stability, you know, it's reassurance. But you look at what Coach Will Hall has done, and, you know, I know a lot of people like to maybe dog him for not having a quarterback, but with the amount of wins that he's gotten, and the situation that he came into, I mean, to have 60 scholarship players in your first year, there's not like his first year to me was just unfair to judge him on, and he still found a way to win 3 ball games without a quarterback. I mean, I don't think people really realize how hard that is. And then you come into last year, which I kind of look at last year as more of a true first year for Will, since it has more of his own players, trips. He's working the transfer portal, and I think they were successful. If they have a quarterback last year, right, they won 8 or 9 games.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. It was evident that every game that they lost, 3 of the games they lost was by 1 possession. And if you just have a quarterback who can just get some completions down the field, you win. You look at Liberty. Troy is another one. I mean, there's just endless examples of that. And, you have to think, if he has a quarterback this year, maybe they do that. I don't know. But, the fact that he's building this, I mean, I'd say 85, 90% of his team is from Mississippi.
I love that.
How do you not root for that? I mean, that's just big in itself.
Yeah. I want to we're going to head back toward the NIL in a minute. I can't help it. I'm going to throw something at you and see how you feel about it. But I want to just, in terms of that, I'm sitting here looking at Frank Gore Jr. I mean, and here he is. I love that guy. I mean, he just seems so planted at USM. You don't hear anything about him looking around or going. He's just focused. I dig that. He's standing pat, seems to be, doesn't he?
Yeah, Frank Gore Jr. is an anomaly.
Yeah.
I don't really quite understand it. And I think part of it is the fact that he does come for money. Obviously, his dad's Frank Gore Sr., number 4 all time in rushing yards in the NFL. Like, I think the big thing for Frank Gore Jr. was going to a place that he could be his own person and leave kind of his own legacy. And he had his chances to play at Miami and follow in his dad's footsteps, and that's not something he wanted to do. The fact that he came to Hattiesburg, now why he came to Hattiesburg, a whole other debate, another question in itself.
Yeah.
How he ended up here still blows my mind. But this is a place where if you show that you play hard and you're a good player, this place will love you back. And Frank Gore Jr. is the epitome of that.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's shown his loyalty. I mean, if he would have transferred his first 2 seasons here, I don't think anybody would have blamed him. I mean, year 1 was when they had the 4 different head coaches in one season.
Yeah.
Last year they go 3-13. It's just he's a company man, and that's just so rare today.
I love it. Look, I want to hit you this, and then we're getting close. It's going to kind of wind us down. We talked about the NIL a little bit, and I know you said the rich get richer, and I respect that and understand it. But I want to ask you, I kind of have a feeling, and I may be off in this, the rich are always rich. Is this really going to change anything? And what I'm seeing and what I think is after you get out of, say, these are rough assumptions, right after you say you get out of the top 10 or the top 15, once you drop down to that scale, might there be more parity because of all the players in the transfer portal? I mean, is that a prospect, do you think?
No, I think you're right. But the problem is, for me at least, those top 10 are going to stay the top 10, right?
Right.
And before, the idea of a group of 5 team having a chance to win a national championship, although far-fetched, wasn't unlikely. Like, you could still see it happen. Now, I do agree with you that because of the transfer portal, what's so strange to me is how these big money schools just miss on players. And so the remedy to that is to go recruit kids, proven players from smaller programs.
Right.
And you think it'd be the other way around. But in basketball, the playing field is very much leveled. That's been really interesting to see. I mean, look, this past Final Four was crazy.
Yeah.
With just the small schools in it. And, I think one of the things that, people want money, but I think people want to go play more than anything because they know if they play, they'll make money.
There you go.
And I definitely agree with you in that sense. Although baseball, the rich have stayed rich. We're seeing, this national championship between LSU and Florida is the transfer portal bowl. I mean, look at Florida and LSU. I mean, they're all transfer portal teams. And obviously they were 2 very rich baseball programs before the transfer portal. But yeah, it's definitely it's good. I think you're going to have more kids stay in college and less likely to go pro because of NIL.
Yeah.
But in the same sense, those same top 10 teams are going to stay the top 10 teams.
Yeah. Well, listen, I told you coming in, one of my jobs here, my main one is time kicker, and we're out of time. And I want to thank you, Dale and I both, so much for taking your time to share with us and our listeners today. We appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me on again.
Going to ask you to hold on with us for just a minute. We'll be back to you. But right now, we're going to take a break to hear from one of our sponsors, and Dale and I will be back with tonight's final segment of the Brouhaha right after this break.
Phillips Building Supply in Laurel, your hometown building supply store since 1954. We are locally owned and pride ourselves on helping our customers find exactly what they need. From foundations to roofs to doors and windows, Phillips has it. For tools, hardware, lumber, and plywood, visit Phillips Building Supply.
Welcome back. I always enjoy talking. That's about the second time we've had him on the show, I believe.
Andrew. Yeah, and Andrew's been he's been a fixture in Hattiesburg probably for about 10 years now.
Yeah.
And so he's very, very close to the program, and that's what he concentrates on.
Yeah. It's obvious, and I'm excited, man. I think we could tell that during the interview. But where's my primary allegiance? I'm gonna go ahead and say it. I may have made this clear. Is to Southern Mississippi when it comes to. But where's your pride? You a rebel through and through? Is that what you are, or how does that work? Or do you care?
I'm an independent.
You're an independent.
I'm an independent. No, I grew up like everybody else in Mississippi during the '60s. I mean, Ole Miss the only one really shining at that time, and of course then they had that. I grew up, and I guess my first memories of Ole Miss was Jake Gibbs. A
guest on our show.
Yep, Jake's been on here a couple times with us, and him running up and down the field. And my first experience at a college football game was watching Ole Miss and Rice. When I was a really bitty kid. I went to New Orleans and Tulane Stadium.
Wasn't that a neat venue?
Yeah, and we sat way up there. I remember that. It was a cold day, and they played Rice and won. But I just remember looking back on the '60s. Seemed like it always came down to Ole Miss and LSU. Back in the '60s, that was the game. That was like the national game. Kind of like maybe Alabama and LSU's kind of taking that stage away.
Yeah.
But it's still a great rivalry for the people that grew up during my time, I think. Even the LSU fans say, man, I'd rather beat Ole Miss than Alabama. Yeah. I'm thinking, really? Well, you beat us enough.
Yeah.
But I have allegiance to Southern Miss. I actually got my degree from Southern Miss, and so I got close to the program then, and I still have a couple good friends down there that that are in the coaching profession down there. So I support the Eagles too. Yeah. And in Mississippi State, I'm really not against the Bulldogs.
I've never heard you say anything derogatory about the Bulldogs.
I may not pull for the Bulldogs in maybe 1 or 2 games a year, but most of the time I'm right there with them. I want Mississippi to do well in all the teams,
Yes, sir.
And I was proud of the Bulldogs winning the national championship a couple of years ago, and in baseball,
and as Ole Miss did.
Yeah.
That's a good segue into this. We talked about this off there at some point in time, but talking about baseball, College World Series championships. This is is it the 4th or 5th one in a row by the SEC West? We had Vanderbilt. We had Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and now LSU. That's 4 in a row, right?
Right. Yes, sir. You've got 4 fingers up,
okay.
Folks.
I'm trying to get another one up. I can't.
Yeah. Well, we can't go back that far.
Okay.
I mean, that's 5 years ago.
But we did have. That's good. But that's pretty impressive. All SEC.
Oh yeah. This is the. I was reading something the other day. 15 out of the last 16 College World Series final games have SEC teams have been involved. Well, at least one of the SEC teams. I think there was only one year, maybe around 2010 or 11 or something like that. But it's been a great run, and it's going. I hate to tell the national college sports baseball fans, but with Texas and Oklahoma,
It can get worse.
it's going to get worse.
LSU, and I don't know the name, but LSU just moved in, and they might have already been there with the second most College World Series championships in the NCAA. You know who number one is? I know you know.
I would think it was USC.
You're exactly right. I think they've won 12.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is 7 or 8.
Yeah, well, they dominated back there in the 70s.
Yeah.
I mean, they just dominated,
Yeah.
I mean, they had great players. I remember the great Tom Seaver and all of them played at USC. And, I mean, there's just been some great players come through USC.
Look at that time frame. Look what was going on at UCLA in basketball.
Yeah.
And then you look at what's going on at Southern Cal in baseball. Don't strike out what Southern Cal probably was doing in football during that time, too. I'm telling you what, the West Coast, historically, I mean, you can't argue with it, dominance.
Well, I think one thing that has, and I'm just saying from my perspective, is that, and I really don't know if this has anything to do with it, but you can't stay up late and watch ball games. And what I'm saying is, if they kick off at 7:30 out there in LA, it's 9:30 here.
I'm asleep.
Yeah. If they want to play an 8 o'clock game, it's 10 o'clock. Now, I stayed up for a while when Leach was coaching Washington State. Back before he ever came to Mississippi State, I was a big Mike Leach fan, and I'd watch his teams play, and Gardner Minshew. And
Yeah.
I'd stay up and watch them play.
The mustache.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is these young athletes, or you go out to a restaurant at 7, 8 o'clock, the West Coast games are not on.
Yeah.
They're going to have, the SEC, the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Those are taking over, and I really believe that one day, and it's not going to be very long. Okay, we're going to have about 5 super conferences, and we're going to have about 60 teams, and they're going to be it's going to be a major universities. What I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And Ole Miss and State should be very fortunate if they're in the SEC, because but at least their baseball programs have kept them very competitive in the SEC.
Yeah.
Now, football, people fuss in Mississippi, but if Ole Miss or State goes 9-3, guys, that's a great season. I mean, that's a great season. You go 9-3 at Alabama, and you've had a terrible season.
Yeah. Ole Miss, 2 years ago, first time in history, they had a 10-win season. 10-win season. Regular season.
Yeah.
So it's different.
Yeah.
It's different.
And, of course, Coach Ball's teams only usually played about 9 games back in those days.
That's true. I
mean, they never did play very many games. And so, if they had a 7-2, 8-1 season, I remember when they used to leave. I remember one time me and my uncle walking down the road, and I said, we were watching the highlights of Ole Miss and LSU on WTOK television. They had about a 30-minute black and white show. Mm-hmm. And so we would sit in there and we were watching the replay, and he says, "Man, I'm quitting. I'll not be a fan." That was the only game Ole Miss lost that year was to LSU, and he wanted to do away with them.
Well, Dale, we've had a good show tonight. We appreciate our guests being with us, and we appreciate all that you do to make this show happen. And but it's come to about the conclusion of our time. We want to remind our folks that you can follow us on our Facebook page at the Brouhaha, also on our YouTube channel where all our shows are cataloged for you. You can go back and watch them, listen to them on demand at our YouTube channel, which was the Brouhaha. But for now, it's come to that time each week where we got to say goodbye, Dale.
Goodbye, Dale.
And we'll see you next week for more of the Brouhaha. Get us out of here, Jamie.
You've been listening to the Brouhaha with Dale McKee and Marshall Wood. Heard Tuesday evening, 6 p.m. on WABO. For more of the Brouhaha, follow us during the week on Facebook and WABO.